Well, first of all, let me just say a special thanks to Senator Carper, not just for what he said on here about the issues that we face in path forward, but for the nice words he said about his friend from Delaware. And so just a pleasure to serve with you, and thank you. Thank you for introducing me to the concept of teletown hall meetings, too, because we do a lot of those in Delaware, and I learned that from you. Mr. President, President has been likening the squabble that's going on here to like a family squabble, and between a husband and a wife. And he says what husbands and wives usually do is they figure out what their differences are, they find some middle ground, some compromise, and they work them out. One of the things I love to do is when I go up and down my state, I talk to people who've been married sometimes a long time, and I'm sure this happens with the presiding officer. People married 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, and I always like to ask them, what is the key to being married 50 or 60 or 70 years? And I get some really funny answers, some great answers as well. I'm sure you do too. But one of my favorite answers was a couple that said to me, it's the 2 C's. It's the 2 C's. And I said, well, what is that? And they said, communicate and compromise. That's really it, communicate and compromise. There's a little theme going on here with the former governor of Virginia, Senator Warner, former mayor of Chattanooga, Senator Carper, and a former governor of Delaware. And I just want to continue with that theme. Somebody said to me, I go home at night, as presiding officer knows, to Delaware. I usually take the train and go home at night, come back the next morning. And this morning I was walking onto the platform to catch my train, to come down here at 7:15. And one person said to me, he said, y'all are acting like a state legislature down there in the Senate. And I said, no, that's not the way we act in Dover, Delaware. In Delaware, and when I was governor for those 8 years, we had a Democratic Senate like we have here. We had a Republican House like we have here. We had a Democratic governor for those 8 years. Yet we managed to work out our differences, to communicate and to compromise, and to be able to balance our budget 8 years in a row, cut taxes 7 out of those 8 years, to add tens of thousands of jobs in a little state like Delaware, which is no mean feat, and to get ourselves a AAA credit rating for the first time in the history of the state. That's what you can do when you communicate and you compromise in good faith. This is at the end of these negotiations, and I think largely taken in good faith by good parties. I have a lot of respect, certainly, for our own leaders, and a lot of respect, a healthy respect for the Speaker over in the House, with whom I served very briefly. I think he's an honorable person and a guy who tries to do what's right. But this is, I think the President said, and I've heard this from pretty good sources, the President said last night to the Speaker of the House, we'll take your number. We'll agree on the spending cuts. We may think it's a little too much focus on domestic discretionary spending, not enough on defense, not really anything on the entitlements, and as I understand, nothing on the revenue side. So it's not a balanced package, but we'll take your number. And this has ended up not so much a debate or discussion over how much we're going to further reduce spending in this fiscal year. The discussion is things that I think we address already here in this body this week on whether or not the Environmental Protection Agency should be allowed to comply with the Clean Air Act as ordered by the Supreme Court to reduce pollution. Or are we going to try to tie their hands in some kind of special, as a rider, attaching a rider to what should be a continuing resolution to fund the government? We had 4 bites out of the apple here this week, and none of the amendments to tie the hands of EPA and their ability to enforce the Clean Air Act, none of those amendments passed. And so now what we're trying to do with our friends, and I think the other body, is to somehow put in the legislation as a rider language that would fly in the face of what we had already decided here. The second thing is the issue as former governor. I was real active in the National Governors Association. One of the things that I worked on hard, and George Voinovich, when he was a governor from Ohio, we worked real hard on legislation that said we don't like federal mandates. States don't like to have federal mandates that say you got to spend money on something, or you can't spend money on something, or you got to raise your revenues in this way, or you got to raise them in that way. We didn't like that. The Congress actually passed, Bill Clinton signed legislation on unfunded mandates. It said you really can't do that. And we don't do it nearly as much as we used to. But part of the dust up here on one of the riders is to tell the District of Columbia what they can or cannot do with their money. Not with federal money, but what they can or can't do with their money. And it's a violation, as far as I'm concerned, of the unfunded mandate, the law that exists. It's certainly in spirit, if not in truth. And the other thing is, one of the issues that we appear to be divided on is to what extent federal money should be used for family planning. I think we all agree here that we ought to work toward having fewer abortions. I think almost everybody agrees that we'd like to have fewer abortions. Well, one of the ways to make sure we have more abortions is to actually reduce the money that's set aside for family planning. It's just counterintuitive. You want fewer abortions? Well, cut funding for family planning? That makes no sense to me. No sense to me. And I hope that we'll walk away from making that bad decision. Again, to echo the comments of our friends from Virginia and Tennessee who just preceded me, this is a speed bump ahead of us, and we're talking about how to come up with like $4 or $5 or $6 billion in savings for the rest of this fiscal year. How about when we're looking for $4 trillion of savings over the next 10 years? That's the tough negotiation, and it all has to be on the table. It just can't be discretionary spending. On the domestic side. We can eliminate it entirely. We still have a big budget deficit. Defense has to be on the table. Some smart ways. We're spending, last year, $402 billion, major weapon systems cost overruns. $402 billion. That's up from $42 billion 10 years ago. Defense has to be on the table. The entitlements have to be on the table. It's a big part of our spending. Revenues have to be on the table. We've been given, I think, a very good roadmap for it. Not a perfect roadmap, but a good roadmap with the work by the Deficit Commission, co-chaired by Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson. And my hope is it will adhere to that. Last thing I want to say, Mr. President, coming down on the train today, I read the business section of, I think it was the New York Times. There's actually some pretty encouraging stuff in there. One of the things they reported on, we just got the retail sales numbers for last month. Most analysts thought they'd be down. They're up. I was at an auto dealership this last weekend in Milford, Delaware, and we're talking about car sales, and they're not flat. They're up. They're up by a good deal, not just at that dealership, but throughout my state and throughout the nation. Go back about 2 years ago, we're selling 9 million cars, trucks, and vans a year. Last year, we're up to 11 million. This year, we're probably up to 13 million. And credit's available again, and things are moving in the right direction. Every Thursday, as the leader knows, we got a number from the Department of Labor. It's new unemployment filings. How many people have filed a claim for new claim for unemployment? We get it every week, every Thursday. And if you go back to the end of 2008, I think the top number was about one week, 660,000 filings, people filing for unemployment, new claims, at the end of 2008. For yesterday, for the last week, we're down to about 380, 390,000. And when the number gets that low, we see new jobs being created. We saw a jobs number for March, new jobs, 220,000 private sector jobs being created. We're going the right way. We're going the right way. Finally, and the economic recovery is beginning, and we need to strengthen it. One of the worst ways to undermine it, or one of the best ways to undermine it, and one of the worst things we could do, is to add to uncertainty, add to unpredictability. I'm not sure who said this, but one of our colleagues before, maybe it was John Ensign over here who said this before, but one of the things that businesses need, want, the markets need and want, certainty, predictability. And one of the reasons why big companies are sitting on the sidelines, a bunch of them still, and not hiring people even though they're sitting on a lot of cash, is because of unpredictability. What are we going to do on the budget? Not just the short-term run-up, but what are we going to do about the big deal? For a 10-year plan, there are $3 or $4 or $5 trillion in savings. What are we going to do about health care? What's the Supreme Court going to do with respect to health care? Are they going to somehow throw it out, or are we going to be able to fix it and make it even better? What are we going to do about energy policy? What are we going to do about tax policy? What are we going to do about transportation policy? All of those uncertainties, and we need to resolve them. And we can begin to resolve at least the budgetary uncertainty here by agreeing on a reasonable spending reduction plan for the balance of this fiscal year, and to go to work on the much tougher problem, and that is how to take $4 trillion out of our debt in the years to come. Last thing I want to say, and a couple of us have been working on this in Homeland Security Government Affairs Committee. What we're beginning to do is to use our committee and our committee's jurisdiction to look into every nook and cranny of federal government to ask this question: how do we get better results for less money? How do we get better results for less money in domestic spending? How do we get better results for less money in defense spending? How do we get better results for less money in entitlement programs? How do we get, and frankly, with the tax expenditures as well? How do we get better results? I call it getting rid of a culture of spendthrift and replacing it with a culture of thrift. And above and beyond all the other stuff we're doing, we need to do that as well. Because everything I do, I know I can do better. I think the same is true of all of us. We can all, everything we do, we can do better. The same is true of federal programs. And the question we have to ask as we look to every nook and cranny of the federal government is to ask this question: can we get better results for less money, or at least better results for the same amount of money, or not much more money? And for a lot of them, the answer is yes, we can. And for us, the challenge is to do that. With that having been said, I yield back my time, and I see my friend from Nevada's over here. He's anxious to agree with everything I've said, and I welcome that. Thank you.